So I'm going to go back here in Photoshop, go back to my windows, and I just want to consolidate all the tabs back to my regular view. So let's take a look at this jet for a moment. And this I have done so that you don't have to sit here and wait on me. But, so we looked at alpha masks on Thursday, and alpha masks live within our channels, right? So we can also use masks in our layers panel, and these are quite simply referred to as layer masks. And any layer that we have can have a mask applied to it. The concept of a layer mask is exactly the same as an alpha channel. Black is transparent, white's opaque, and it actually is a little simpler to work with than alpha channels, because the layer that you want to create masks for, you're working right within that layer. You're not jumping back and forth between multiple panels or anything like that. So what I have here are two different types of channels. So the first one here, we've got our jet outlined, and this black and white mask, this layer mask that's applied to it, is simply referred to as a layer mask. It's just the same as an alpha channel is. A layer mask is a raster image. You can paint into it, draw into it, do whatever you need to mask out the areas that you want to show or hide. And the one right below it, with the gray background, is what's referred to as a vector mask. You can create vector masks, again, for any object within your file, but object vector masks are created based upon paths. So if I take a look at my paths panel, you'll see that I've actually outlined this jet, outlined it with a pen tool. We'll all remember the pen tool from Illustrator, from InDesign, from any other Adobe app you've ever used. It works exactly the same way that it does in all those programs. I'm not going to go through how a pen tool, you should have a grasp on that by now, I think. But just know that, there are a lot of reasons to work with the pen tool or vector masks within Photoshop. The primary difference between a layer mask and a vector mask is that, quite honestly, a vector mask it's a vector outline. So if I outline this plane and I go and I place it into InDesign and I blow it up 300%, that mask, that vector mask, will hold its clean, crisp edge, just like any other vector object will. Don't be fooled into thinking that means that the raster image inside of it is going to hold up. And you might ask yourself, well, then what's the point? Well, there are actually several. So even though that vector mask will hold up, no matter what size, your image within your layer still has to conform to the rules of raster-based images. And we do all know the difference between raster and vector-based images, right? From Production One? All right. So basically a raster-based image, whatever size it is, if you blow it up from there, it'll start to get soft to kind of fall apart. You can always reduce it. But Reasons to use a vector mask are you need a super really clean outline, maybe a mechanical object, something like this will give you that kind of super clean, precise outline. If you can draw with a pen tool, nice and detailed and precise, that's what you'll get. Another reason that you'll work with the pen tool within Photoshop is that an awful lot of, we kind of get spoiled working on Macs, I think, because anybody that's been a Mac person for long, because there are an awful lot of options. And but if you're on a PC, for instance, and somebody needs an EPS file, say they need an outlined image of a jet to put into a newsletter or into a brochure of some kind, and they need it as an EPS file, you need to draw the outline. You need to use a pen tool to draw the outline of that jet so that so it's a path, and you can save. Whenever you save the EPS, that path will define the transparent areas. So that's just one of the reasons. But I mean, I'm very spoiled by layer masks and alpha channels and everything else, but the ongoing yearly project that I have that I mentioned earlier, it's actually, the project is a bunch of, it's color variations of the case and the handles on tool chests. So, and they're used in an online configurator. The software they use is PC based. So, the chest, all the handles, all the little details are outlined with a pen tool. Just because that's the way they needed them in order to separate stuff. So you get a lot of reasons you might need to use a pen tool, but besides just creating, making a decision to create a vector mask or a layer mask, but we can use that. We can create an outline, and we can create a mask of an object using that outline, which we'll do in a little bit. The nice thing about layer masks is that, I'll just turn this one on. If I right-click on this layer mask, I can disable it, so my background comes back through. You see I get this nice little red X over. And then if I re-enable it, I get my transparency. I can also use that mask to create a selection. So I can either right-click on it, I can do select and mask with it, take me back into the mask. That we looked at the mask workspace on Thursday. We go back in there. I'm just going to cancel it. If I hold down my command key and click on that mask, there's our little marching ants. I can make a selection of it. And if I need to, I can always make a duplicate of this layer. So if I select the layer, duplicate it, that one off. I can even add to this mask in any way I want. So let's set our hardness down to 0. We can kind of do whatever we need to. This is all pixel based. This particular mask was all done with a paintbrush. We can also have vector masks and raster masks applied to the same layer. So I can do it up here actually if I have, yeah, let's do this. I'm going to delete this. All right. So I've got this. I can add a layer mask to this layer by simply going down to the bottom of my layers panel, and this square with the black circle in the middle of it, click on that, and it'll add a opaque layer mask to that. So remember, white, we get to see everything. So then if we start painting in, let's come in here and make this a hard edged brush. Paintbrush, make sure black is selected. We can start painting out. Let me do something else real fast. Where's my show keys? There it is. All right. So we can kind of start masking that out. I'm going to clear this, delete that layer mask. But I can also go ahead and add a vector mask to this by, I'm just going to go back to my path that I already have selected. So if I select this path, go back to my layer, and I go to my layers menu, we've got a vector mask option, and we can use the current path. And that'll apply that gray layer mask, or channel vector mask, excuse me. And if I want to do additional work to that beyond this, I can also always come back down here to my layer, to my mask option at the bottom of my menu. Click on that. It'll place a layer mask right in between the two. And I could go back to my paintbrush. Soft and kind of big, and I could combine, so I could go in and kind of mask a little bit, kind of combine a vector mask along with a regular channel mask. So parts of my image are going to stay nice, crisp, and clean, but yet I've got the benefit of working with a soft-edged brush to kind of feather off certain edges. And if I add a color panel behind that, so we do something like, do something like that. It kind of gives a real nice kind of effect to that. We've got our nice sharp edges, but yet we start bringing some of the blues into that jet around the edges to make it sort of blend with its background a little bit. Let's see. So working with layer masks is a very non-destructive way of working with images. What we looked at on Thursday, the things we did, were kind of destructive. Basically, we created those alpha masks. We copied elements out of the main image, pasted them into another one. And if we hadn't taken the step of saving, the original image, once we copied and pasted that, say saved our file and closed it, when we go back to it the next time, we wouldn't have access to all that background that we had. And there's no real way to get that back short of going back to the original image and kind of starting over. That's usually what's referred to as working destructively. Working with alpha masks is working non-destructively, which is what we're going to try to do anytime we're working with Photoshop, is work in a way that allows us to always return to an original state of an image no matter where we're at within our layer hierarchy or anything else. So and when I say it's non-destructive, if I disable both of these masks, I'm back to my original image. And I can delete those masks or whatever else I need to do. All right? So we're going to take the concept we looked at on Thursday and apply it to layer masks and build out images. So on the destructive, non-destructive topic, I'm going to get rid of both these layer masks that I just created here on this. So there's another item that will allow us to work non-destructively. And I'm going to duplicate this layer so I can go back to it. So I take this jet and I scale him down and go about the rest of my project. If I want to come back to this image, and this is just sort of the simplest way I can think of to demonstrate this, and I want it to actually be full size, I can't just size this back up, right? Because we lose all of our gorgeous resolution that we had in it, right? So we can't do that. But all right, let's go back to this. So we can turn this into what's referred to as a smart object. Smart objects are the other item we're going to look at today. So if I have this jet selected and go here into my layer panel menu, I can if I come down here about 2/3 of the way, there's an option called Convert to Smart Object. Select that. You'll see that it puts a little icon on the corner of that layer, little disk icon. Now, if I were to scale this object down, like I did before, and come back to it and want to scale it back up, I kept all of my resolution, right? Smart object basically takes whatever item you convert to a smart object, it actually puts it inside of a container. It's the best way I can think to describe it. Puts it inside of a container so that when you scale or anything you do, there are other things we're going to do, but anything you do will apply whatever effects, the scale, the transform, blurs, sharpens, any of that kind of stuff. It'll apply it to the container itself, not to the image. So the image, actually in that example, whenever I scaled it down, the image retained its size, it just got scaled down. Whenever I scaled it back up, all of the resolution was still there. And smart objects are the second non-destructive way of working within Photoshop. So we're using layer masks, we're using smart layers. We can combine layer masks and smart layers. So if I come over here and grab my jet outline, go back to my smart object, layer, vector mask, make it with the current path. I can apply masks to my smart objects as well. Again, gives us a very wide range of flexibility within the stuff we're working with. Doesn't compromise the integrity of the original image. Allows it to stay clean, crisp, and beautiful. So, here is the other benefit of a smart mask. So let's say that I decide I'm going to blur this image a little, or let's say we need to let's sharpen it. I'm going to select the image, go to the filters, down to sharpen, apply unsharp mask to it. And I'm going to crank my unsharp mask way up. Kind of go overboard. Done. I applied it directly to that image. So I save my file, I come back and work on it a couple of days later, and I decide that is just a little too much. I can't go back and change it. All right? But let's convert that back to a smart object. And now let's go apply lost track of where I was going. Let's go back and apply that unsharp mask to it. Really go. Apply it. So look at the difference in my layers. So now again, I created a smart object out of my photo. Basically, I put that photo inside of a container. Whenever I apply that filter, we now have a smart filters layer. And here's that unsharp mask I just added to it. And it's got an eyeball. Both of them have eyeballs next to them. If I click on the eyeball, it removes the unsharp mask. But do we know what this big white square is? Anybody want to try? It's an alpha mask, or it's a layer mask, actually. So, I don't know. For whatever reason, for whatever it is I'm making, let's say that we want the cockpit area to be overly sharpened, but we want the rest of the jet to look kind of like it did. I can select this layer mask, my paintbrush tool. Remember, black is opaque, white's transparent. Let's actually, why don't we select that layer mask like Command I, that'll invert it, make it all black. When I'm working in a layer mask, up here in my properties panel, I get some additional options. I can feather and I can change the density of the mask. Just so I can kind of see through it a little bit. But I can go back over here, and if this is the area that I want to be over sharpened, I'm going to switch to a white paintbrush. Make sure my opacity is way up. And I can pull that back through. I'm not quite sure what need I had to do it that way exactly, but You get the point though. We've applied this unsharp mask. It's given us a layer mask to work with. And I can pull back that overly sharpened image through that image. And maybe at that, it's still overkill. If I double click on unsharp mask here in my layers panel, it opens my unsharp mask panel. Dial that back. So I've taken the first time I applied an unsharp mask, applied it, which basically, if I got it wrong, it basically ruined my image. And I've turned it into a smart object, and now I can go back and I can edit all these kinds of things anytime I want to. It's pretty powerful stuff. It just gives you a lot of flexibility when you're working. I mean, you'll work on something over the course of a couple of days, and what looks good to you on one day, you come back and you look at it the next day and it's just like, man, what was I thinking when I did that? We're giving ourselves the ability to fix those things and to tweak them and kind of fine tune them, all right? Now, within the same session, we always have our history panel. We can always either Command-Z to undo something, or we can go to our history panel and go back to a particular point in time. But once we saved our file and we've closed it, and we come back to it later, we don't have that history panel anymore. So within the session we're working on, we do have more, we've got flexibility, but creating smart layers really helps us control the images that we're trying to create. A smart object can contain more than one layer in it. So the nice thing about a smart object here is that, actually I need to close some of these other windows so it's not quite so hard. So if I double click on the smart layer, it opens my original image. And I could make, let's say I decide I want to make a color adjustment to this. I'm going to go to my adjustment layers. We'll do hue and saturation just to mess with what we're doing. Do that, pull that out. So now I've got an adjustment layer inside of my smart layer. Save that. Command-S will save it. And when I come back over here to my image that I was working on, the changes I just made to that smart layer are reflected in my main composition. Did I lose anybody with what I did on that one? Did I? So a smart layer, think of whenever you create a smart layer, think of it as another file. Think of it as an embedded file. It's not really, but it's the easiest way to think about it. If I double click on that layer, so let's call this, SmartJet. If I double click on that, let me redo that. Didn't do what I wanted it to do. There we go. All right, so we got our SmartJet. Double click on it. It opens it in a new tab where I can work on it, do other stuff. And then whenever I'm done doing the work, I save it like any other file. but it doesn't live on the hard drive. It kind of lives in RAM, basically. So I'll save it. I can close it, come back over here to my main file, and it applied those changes to the main file. I can open that back up, turn that layer off, save it, come back over here, and it's back to the way it was. So when we're trying to work non-destructively, we're working with layer masks and we're working with smart layers, basically. It gives us the most flexibility anyway. I'm not going to sit here and say that anytime I work on a file, I turn every layer into a smart layer or anything else. It makes your file big, without a doubt. It adds to your file size. But the flexibility that it gives you, kind of pick and choose, be smart about, what you turn into a smart object and what you don't. And that'll, it becomes a pretty powerful tool to work with. So, I created those outlines of that jet. This is a composition I made with it. It's the same jet, just worked with in multiple ways. But to the earlier point about being able to use absolutely anything that's black and white or grayscale for a mask, let's see. I didn't really use this as a mask, but I've got some smoke here. I could use that for a mask, if I copy that image, all that, copy it, or let's not copy it, if I copy that layer and take it back over here into my jet composition, I can go into my channels. There's another thing to point out. Create a new channel. I can paste that image in there. Where'd it go? That I'm not getting. Copy that. That becomes an alpha channel. I can select that alpha channel. Come back over here to my jet. Actually, I'm going to delete the filter mask, and I'm going to clear the smart filters. I can take that, create a mask out of it. Black and white cloud image. Use it as a mask. One of the things about layer masks, the image and the mask itself, whether it's a layer mask or a vector mask, are always linked by this chain. Click on the chain, that breaks it. And you can move the object inside of your mask independently. And when you're done moving it, got it back to where you want it, relink that. And then the second thing about layer masks, if you noticed, I've got this layer mask selected. When I go back over here to my channels, there's that mask in the channels. and it's really kind of only temporary while I have it selected. That mask will show up here as an alpha channel. If I come back over here and deselect it, it's gone. Actually, it's kind of misleading. I have this one in here. Let me delete this one. Come back over here, select my layer with the alpha channel applied. And it's labeled as such, Smart Jet Mask. Tells you what it is. If I deselect that, go back to my channels, that alpha is gone. So, in a nutshell, that's working with layers, channel masks, that kind of thing. All right? So, we're actually going to build an image. And there's of the files that you downloaded, there's a folder called Coffee. We're going to use that one. And this is the basic image we're going to make. So if you look at all the images that are in there, you've got a coffee cup, there's a little file with some coffee beans. There's also a folder in there, Smoke and Steam. We'll probably want that one, or one of those images out of there. But we're going to use just layer masks, smart objects, to create a composition. And what I've set up here, basically, my coffee mug is porcelain. I use the vector mask to outline that, because I might want to edit, modify it a little bit later. There's also a file in there for this type. There's an Illustrator file. We're going to copy paths out of an Illustrator file and paste them into Photoshop. I've got a couple layers here that make up my steam, because who wants a cream-filled cup of cold coffee? And we've got a smart object down here of these beans. But if I open the smart object, you'll see that, oh, that's something else I can do. You'll see that it's actually that beans file, but I kind of duplicated it and blended them together using alpha masks. Because I thought, whenever I put it together, I thought the beans themselves looked really kind of big and horsey, so. And it was a good reason to make a smart object and to blend some layers together. So, don't save that. So that's basically the image that we're going to make. Once we're done with this, I'm going to step you through the major parts of it. We're going to do a couple of basic things to start with. There's some other things in here that I want to point out. And then finish it. Once you've finished it, use those jets and see if you can create a similar kind of a composition. There's a sky in there, there's the jets. You kind of want to bring clouds over top and that kind of thing. And we'll kind of leave you on your own on that one. But this one, so I'm going to point out a couple of things I did here, just so you know what we're going to do. Let's see. Do I have something that will? There's one other thing I got to show you on layer mask that I just remembered. Do I have a file that will? don't think I do. I had a whole bunch of jobs on here, but I cleaned them up over the weekend. Moved them into my archive. All right. Well, that's okay. We'll make it work here. We'll do it. All right, so here's what I want you to do. We are gonna start with an image that's about, let's start with our coffee mug image, all right? And we're gonna actually create an alpha mask, or a vector mask out of that. But, so let's do that. So open up, and the coffee mug is actually the size of file that I want to work with. So that image. Let's open out Photoshop. And we're just actually going to save this before we do anything. So why don't you just save this file, do a save as, find a place on your hard drive to save it, wherever you're working, and Kern coffee composition or something. Coffee composition, or give it some name. But save its format as a Photoshop file. By default, it's going to want to save it as a JPEG. So we're going to save it as a Photoshop file. When you make the Photoshop selection, it's going to change the extension to .psd. And just say save. Yeah. Say it again? Photoshop. Yep. And the first step of this fun thing is going to be simply grabbing your pen tool. Remember, Command plus, Command minus, zoom in and zoom out. So use your pen tool, and you're going to outline this coffee mug. So just like the pen tool in Illustrator, when you draw out, if you push down, when you draw out your handlebars, if you hold down the Option key, you can break the tangent of those and change the direction of your path. And you're just going to kind of outline this coffee mug as closely as you can. But the nice thing is, you get it not quite right, you can go back and fix it later. And once you're done outlining it, I want you to go to your Paths panel, and you should see it as a work path. And I just want you to double click and save the path. I can tell that If you need to go back in and edit your path after you saved it, right below the pen tool, two below is the arrow. There's a selection arrow and a direct selection arrow. Again, just the same as Illustrator. Direct selection will let you select a point. And edit your curve just to clean it up. I always really try to, whenever I outline with a pen tool, at least in Photoshop, I always try to go a pixel or two inside of my image just to make sure I get it all and I don't get a lot of background. This just goes to show you can't get away from a pen tool. You can also, too, vector paths. You can also use the shapes. We looked at the vector shapes tools, I think, one day, first week. You can also use those to create shapes, to create masks. Pen tool, a vector object, any of that kind of stuff. So did we get our mug outlined, or are we still working on it? If you get it done and you want to jump ahead, with that path selected, go back to your layers panel. Layer, vector mask, create it with the current path. You can see mine needs a lot of work. So, once you've made that vector mask, if you select it, you can go back in with your direct selection tool and fix your areas that maybe are less than perfect. Clean it up. Just know that with a vector mask, when you select it, you can grab a direct selection tool and you can go in, click on it, and you can edit that path after you've finished it. It's just like a clipping mask in Illustrator. get it decent, and then that'll be good enough for now. You can always go back in and clean it up again, tweak it up a little bit later if you got too much extra showing. But I kind of want us to be able to move on here. So, all right. So do we all have an outlined mug, coffee mug? Okay. So next I want you to take back here to our files, open up those coffee beans. Just do a Command A on your keyboard. That'll select all. Command C to copy it. And then go back into our coffee composition. And I want you to paste it in. Command V. See, and I'm just going to name that real quick. Coffee beans, so I know where they are. And then I'm just going to grab my selection tool from the toolbar up here, top tool. And I'm going to scale these beans down to be the height of my composition. And then if I hold down the Shift key and click on it, I can drag it straight across to the other edge. And I'm going to drag my layer below my coffee mug. So my coffee mug's on top. And then we'll do this. So you can either select this coffee beans layer and go to the layers menu and duplicate layer. Just let it keep that name. And then drag it over so that it's not right up against. I want it to overlap a bit. So if I were to take that layer and drop its opacity a little bit, this is the amount of overlap I put on it. And I want to do that again to fill in the right-hand side. I'm going to duplicate that differently this time though. With that selected, I'm just going to hold down my Option key, click on it, and drag it across, and it'll create a third layer. So you can duplicate and move either going through the layer menu or holding down the Option key, click and drag. So we got 3 pieces of sets of coffee beans here. So I'm going to select all 3 of these. And the one thing I forgot to show you earlier is you can group layers in Photoshop. So if I select all 3 of those layers, come down here to my row of options here at the bottom of the layer panel, there's a little folder right here, right next to the new layer. Click on that. With those 3 objects the layers selected, click on that folder, and it'll put them into a group that you can then open up, and we'll call that group bean background. So we can group objects like that. If we want to have them, like if we've just got we've got a few items in our composition that we want to kind of keep together, but we want to clean up our layer panel a little bit, we can group them together that way. one thing to point out, we're not going to do it here, but when you have a group like this, you can also apply a layer mask to a group, and it'll affect everything within that group, just so you know. So if I did that, that layer mask is masking everything inside of that group. We're not going to do that here, but I just wanted to point it out. I meant to mention it earlier, and I didn't have a good reason to, so. But what I want to do is create a smart object out of these three layers of beans, so that we're going to have an object for our beans, and then we'll have a layer for our coffee mug. So even though I already made a group out of this, if I right-click on that, if I right-click out here in the gray area, I can convert that group into a smart object. And there's our bean background as a smart object. So if you'll notice, one of the problems with our bean smart object is if we look closely, we can see where the seams, see that straight line running down through here, where we kind of overlap those beans. We're actually going to go open up our smart object, double click on it. Open up that group, and then actually, I'm going to move the middle one to the top so that it overlaps the left and the right side images. And then come down here, so for that middle one, come down here to our mask, apply a mask to it, and then just grab a paintbrush. And however you need to see this, it's kind of hard to see what's going on. You could always select this layer, drop its opacity a little bit so we can, no, that wasn't what I wanted to do. We can select these two layers maybe. Drop the opacity there. Yeah, that'll work. I'm just going to drop the opacity on those two outside layers so I can see what I'm doing, so I can actually see those seams. Come back up here to my layer mask on the middle layer, and we're just going to, with a soft edged brush, we're just going to kind of mask off this edge a little bit. And I'm going to try to sort of follow the dark areas so that when we bring everything back to its original opacity, we won't see those lines anymore. And I'll go over here to the other side and do the same thing there. So I basically just masked off those edges of that middle layer where they overlaps the left and the right. And when I'm done, I'll just put everything back the way it should be. And if you look really hard, you can probably find them, but you really can't find those seams. while we're in here, there's another thing we could do. Only because I notice it. See how, because we duplicated that one image 3 times, see the repetition of the pattern of that real light bean? If we come back over here to our tools, about 1/3 of the way down, you should see something that looks like a rubber stamp. If you click on that, that's the clone tool. And let's see. I'm just going to click the layer that this one's on. Increase my brush size. Set my hardness down. Then if I click the Option key, say down here in the middle of these beans somewhere, and click, come back up here, and you see what it did? It picked up the area that I just sampled. I can kind of cover that over. And you can paint in areas that way, but I just wanted to do it real quick for to break up that repetition of pattern. There really aren't that many patterns in this. It's kind of why I like the image to do this with. But if I come over to the right-hand side, I can do the same thing. I can right-click, and or maybe that's a little better one. Sort of cover those up a little bit. Anyway, once we're done with that, even if you're not done with it, that's fine. Bring it back to this point, save it. Remember, we're working on, and then go back over to our main composition. And our seamless beans are sitting in there. So we kind of took 3 different images, tiled them together, and then cleaned up the edges just to kind of hide where we pulled them all together. It's like anything. Good photography selection makes a difference with a lot of this stuff. You know, take the time to look around and find the image you want, knowing what you want to do with it. Although I didn't know I was going to do this part with the beans, but it still worked. Is everybody still with me? Know what we're doing? Close some of these layers, or some of these files that are open. I really don't need these beans anymore. Okay. All right. So we've got this image that we're working with. So let's refer back to my original. So I've got this type sitting in the middle, right? And that file is, again, in all of those files that you downloaded, crazyjoe.ai. We're just going to open that file up, double click on it, open Illustrator, and we're just going to copy those paths out of Illustrator and paste them into Photoshop. So just grab a selection tool, select that type, copy it, and then when I go back over to Photoshop, let's zoom in here, and I'm going to paste. And whenever I paste paths out of Illustrator, I'm going to get an option. So I can import them as a shape layer, as a path, pixels, a smart object, whatever I want to do with it. I wanted to use a path. I could do a smart object, I could do a shape layer. Both really easy. I'm just going to save it as a path though. Say OK. Not what I want to do. All right, now I'll save it as a path. I had my coffee mug selected. It pasted that path that I copied out of Illustrator straight into my vector mask, which I didn't want. Now let's try path. There we go. So there's our path, kind of small. If we look in our paths layer, there it is. Give it a name. And then with that, I'm just going to grab my selection tool over here on my toolbar, about 3/4 of the way down, path selection tool. Select all that. Command T on my keyboard. Yeah. You have a quick, okay. So if I hit Command T on my keyboard, that'll allow me to transform that path. And I can just scale it up. Kind of position it. And then I'm just going to select that path, go down here to the bottom, and there's a little dotted circle. If I click on that, that'll make a selection out of it. Back over here, and let's add a new layer. So above my coffee mug, we're going to click the little plus sign here, add a new layer. Come over here to your foreground color, find a color to give it. So let's, actually maybe I'll sample this lighter color and then let's try that. Say okay, and with that selection on that layer, edit, fill with our foreground color. So that kind of placed our type in the middle of our coffee. Maybe I should have made it a smart object because I kind of wish it was a little bit bigger, but oh well. I'll leave it as it is for now. So let's look real quick back at my reference image. So if we take a look at this, you'll see that it looks like it's kind of raised above the surface a little bit. It's got a little bit of a bevel to it. Here's our coffee foam. So we can, within these layers, we've got different opacity settings that we can mess around with, kind of try to get it to blend in a little bit. I'm going to leave that alone for now. But down here at the bottom, again, in our options for the layer, select the layer. There's a little FX icon. If you select the FX, click on that, you've got different different effects. You probably saw them in Illustrator. They're in a lot of different apps. But I'm just going to select bevel and emboss. Zoom in a little bit. And just emboss it, smooth, not much depth. Just make the size real low too, 4. This little circle in the middle of the panel changes my light source. You can pick a highlight color, pick a shadow color, work with that to get it kind of the way you want it. So once you get that the way you want it, or at least close to the way you want it, because as we add things and take things away, the look's going to change. We're probably going to want to come back and make adjustments to stuff like this. Just say okay and accept it. And you'll see that on that layer, we've got below it effects, and there's that bevel and emboss. So we can always go back into that bevel and emboss at any time, double click on it, open it back up, and make further adjustments to it. So just get it close. Don't worry about it being just right. Maybe we... I'm also going to point out, the only reason I know exactly what I'm doing for every single layer is I made this up earlier today. So I've done it once. I mean, the thing is like, I knew what I wanted to do. I had the concept in my head, but sometimes it's just kind of trying different things and figuring it out. I also did some specific things certain ways so we worked with, I mean, you know, outlining the coffee mug, I did it with a vector mask. Could have done it with a layer mask. Just as easy, probably. But, you know, I've done this all already, so I know exactly what I'm doing. I mean, only because I've been through the steps. So what else we got? We go back and take a look at this. We've got this steam rising off of it. Don't have that in my original images. So if we go back over here to the files we downloaded, the smoke and steam, let's see. These are the gallery. I think this is the image I used right here. So I'm going to open that up in Photoshop. So the way I created this, I'm going to, again, I did this once before. I didn't get to where I ended up through doing it right off the bat the first time. I tried a few different things before I got very far. But whenever I did this steam, it's this layer, but all I did was applied a screen to it. I actually did 2 layers just to get some variance, but I applied a screen to it. Screens work best with purely black and white images. I mean, not only, but they work well with pure black and white images. So what I did with this image, whenever I tried it first, if I select it all and I copy it, and I come over here to my composition, it's going to be above everything else. So let's paste that in. If I go and change this to screen, let's see what I get. It worked out okay that way. I didn't have to. I actually converted it to a black and white image and darkened the blacks and brightened the whites, so I got, but you don't, I mean, this worked out okay this way. I just kind of take that, apply screen to it. So what screen does is anything that's white, it magnifies, and anything that's black, it basically makes go away, which is the opposite of multiply. Multiply basically multiplies the black into your image. If I switch this to multiply, and the white kind of goes away. And then some of these others are variants of that. I mean, Layton, there's a linear dodge, which is kind of very obvious. The best way on all of these blending layers to get used to them is to try them out and see what you can do. You know, linear dodge actually gives you something that is kind of interesting. Overlay, I know, doesn't really. Overlay's not going to work super well here because of the RGB black background we've got. But, you know, you just kind of toy around with it a little bit. I landed on screen, although, yeah, we'll stick with screen for now. But if you notice, it's kind of hazy right here. This kind of comes down. I don't like how that works. So we're just going to take this layer. We're going to add a layer mask to it. Whoops. This layer, we're going to add a layer mask to it. Grab a paintbrush. We'll make it nice and big with a soft edge. And then with black, I'm just going to kind of paint away some of this. It's just a little much. I can go into my opacity, drag it down, make it not quite so strong. Like I kind of feel, I don't really care for the look of that overall. But what I kind of wanted was, whenever I did this, and you see I actually have two layers for it, if I turn this top layer off, I wanted to pull out this wisp. I really like that wisp, but I liked how subtle some of this other stuff was. I just kind of wanted something to pop. So I basically screened this, or took the opacity down on the steam layer, like around 63, 64. And then I duplicated it, the entire layer. Played around with my blend modes a little bit. I think overlay in this case kind of got it done. We'll try that. And then I'm just going to kind of mask back some of this stuff because I just want that sort of wisp to pop out of there. You know, it's just going by your eye. I mean, kind of being a little creative. No certain one way that's right, that's wrong. It's just whatever gets you the results you want. That's the nice thing about working in RGB, working for screen. If it looks right here, then you're doing good. Or if it looks the way you want it to, then you're doing good. What we got? Okay. So we added some steam. Maybe we actually, I don't know, maybe I select both those layers and make the steam a little bigger, a little bit more. Kind of like that curly Q there. Maybe I need to go back into this mask with white. Pull this little curly Q out. I don't know. Kind of tinker with it, play with it, get the steam to a way you like it. Some of the other features of my original composition here. I did put the shadow off the coffee mug over the beans, and I didn't go overboard with this. It should probably try to contour to the beans and stuff, but I didn't go to that extreme. It looks okay the way I did it. I darkened the edges so that we kind of highlighted our mug in the middle. I even kind of blurred the corners a little bit. So kind of keep things organized, keep it grouped. If I disable this layer mask here, easy way to handle that shadow, I'm going to disable the vector mask so I can see that shadow. What I could just do is come over here to my layers, or my paths, and I'm just going to kind of trace the general shape of that shadow. You could probably do it with a paintbrush tool if you wanted to as well. No particular magic to doing it the way I'm doing it. Grab my direct select. Oops. I direct select. Adjust that a little bit. This is my shadow. I'm just going to use this path though to make a selection. Come back over to my layers. Re-enable my vector mask, and I'm going to add a new layer here, and I'm just going to fill that selection. Edit, fill with black. There's my mug shadow. And I can go ahead and take that, and remember that that multiply basically multiplies a color into whatever's below it. So if I set that to multiply and I knock back the opacity a little bit, I start seeing, I still see the shadow, but I start seeing the coffee beans through it. Because, you know, the shadow in this case wouldn't be absolute, I don't think. Plus, it's always nice seeing detail in a shadow. It's kind of a hard-edged shadow. You could use a blur tool on it, maybe. Come over here to your tools. There's a blur tool. But you could also, with that layer selected, you could also go up here to your filters, down to your blur, and do a motion blur. Motion blur will, whatever direction I turn this dial right here, it'll blur it in that direction. Kind of stretch it out. There's something that looks good. I mean, again, nothing magical, just looking for stuff that looks good. This shadow coffee mug also had a little bit of shadow off the bottom of it here, so I'm just going to kind of grab a paintbrush. Maybe I'll add another layer. kind of big, soft, black. Multiply or darken those. So we just kind of start building out our details from there. I kind of think this is kind of a good opportunity to kind of group some layers together. A group will work just fine. I don't think it has to be a smart object, but there's our mug shadow. Select these. New group from layers. Yeah. Speak up. So after I made the shadows, I grouped them together. After I did that, or is, you asked about how I did the grouping? Oh, the path. Over here on the path panel, I just, whenever I outlined that mug, I saved it on my paths panel. Did you save whenever you made that path, did you save it? Okay. So if you just want that path back, all you really need to do is select it, and it'll, see it's right there. And then you can make a selection out of it just by clicking the selection button down here at the bottom. And then I just filled that selection is all I did. Okay. So, okay. So yeah, why don't you, keep, work through kind of detail, add some others. See if you can figure out if you notice on my original one, I kind of blurred the corners, kind of darkened it, put a vignette in. So see if you can figure out how to do the blurred corners, but keep the middle, all the coffee beans in the middle nice and sharp. Which I showed in all the pieces.